Hi, I'm Evangeline, and I used to think the worst thing in a marriage was silence, until the silence started tasting bitter, like warm milk laced with something I never agreed to drink. My husband smiled every night, handed me the same cup, told me I was just stressed. But behind that smile, he was logging into my accounts, stealing my name, draining everything I built. He even told people I was mentally unstable, just in case I ever dared to speak. And the people I loved? They believed him. Now I wonder, how long had he planned to disappear with my money, my identity, my life? And how many others saw it happening and said nothing? The first thing I noticed was the way my breath fogged up the window. Outside, the Oregon sky had turned that flat gray that always signaled mid-November. Trees in our yard were nearly bare, their branches trembling in the breeze. I had just set the table for two, again. The quiet hum of the dishwasher behind me was the only sound in the house. Garrett walked in from the den, carrying two mugs. "Got your milk, sweetheart," he said, like he did every night. The warmth of his voice used to make me feel safe. Now it landed differently, like a song I'd heard too many times. I smiled, took the mug from him, and watched as he turned to check the front door lock. The gesture felt rehearsed. He always brought the milk, always locked up, every single night. When he returned, I forced myself to sip. The milk was warm, familiar. But that night, something tasted off. It wasn't dramatic, not sour, just faintly bitter, like it had sat too long in metal or touched something it shouldn't have. I lowered the mug slowly. I said, trying not to sound too deliberate. "What?" Garrett glanced at me from the couch, a hint of a grin tugging at his lips. "Bad batch?" "Maybe," I replied. "Tastes a little strange." He shrugged. "Might have been close to the date." I grabbed it from the back of the fridge. He didn't look concerned. Too casual, too smooth. I nodded, but in my gut something turned. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Something I had been pretending not to see. That night, I didn't finish the milk. The next morning, I woke up groggy. I had vague dreams of voices I couldn't place, of rooms that weren't mine. My head throbbed like I'd had wine, but I hadn't touched a drop. Garrett was already dressed and reading emails at the kitchen island. "Morning," he said without looking up. "You slept like a rock." I smiled weakly and poured myself a glass of water, but my hands trembled. Later that afternoon, I pulled a notebook from the drawer in my home office, one of those old spiral ones from college I never threw out. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, "Day 1, didn't finish milk. Head still foggy. Garrett too calm. Tasted something off." As I wrote, memories came back in fragments. The week before, I'd missed 2 client calls I didn't remember scheduling. I sent a file to the wrong folder and forgot my password. Twice. Garrett had joked, "You're losing your edge, babe." I'd laughed. But I hadn't laughed inside. Now, I wasn't sure I was losing anything, except clarity. That night, when Garrett handed me another warm mug, I thanked him, then carried it to the sink under the pretense of rinsing a spoon. I held the cup under the faucet, just enough water to thin it out. I brought it back to the couch and pretended to drink, letting the rim touch my lips while my eyes stayed fixed on the TV. Garrett watched me, or rather, watched the cup. It was then I knew I had to stop playing along. The next morning, I found my laptop slightly out of place, just a half-inch, but enough to make me notice. I never left it open, and I certainly didn't leave the browser up on my online banking. "Did you open my laptop?" I asked casually while pouring coffee. Garrett barely looked up. "Yeah, I was cleaning the desk. It looked dusty. Figured I'd wipe it down." I smiled. "Thanks." Inside, I wanted to scream. That night, I poured the milk directly into the sink. Not a drop left behind. I rinsed the mug, refilled it with water, and sat on the couch. Garrett glanced over. "Not in the mood tonight?" he asked. I shook my head. "Stomach's a little off." He accepted the answer too easily. I laid in bed that night, Muscles still, breath steady, pretending to sleep. My ears strained for every creak, every footstep. The hallway light flicked on beneath the door, casting shadows across the floor. I kept still. I didn't move. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought it might give me away. I had no plan, just suspicion. And in that moment, more than fear, I felt something else rise in me. Clarity. I lay frozen, my breath carefully controlled, my body heavy with feigned sleep. Outside our bedroom door, I heard the soft creak of the floorboard Garrett always stepped on when crossing the hall. A pause, then retreating steps. He didn't check on me that night, not like the others. When I opened my eyes, the room was still cloaked in dim light. My muscles ached from holding the same position too long. But what unnerved me more was the familiar fog settling over my thoughts again. As if my mind had been on mute for hours. Time didn't just pass, it had skipped. Downstairs, I tried to retrace my evening. I found my phone in the fridge, beside the eggs. A half-written email sat open on my laptop, addressed to my boss, but unfinished. I didn't remember writing it. I didn't remember starting it. I closed the tab, heart pounding. Later that day, while on a Zoom call, a colleague hesitated mid-sentence and then said, "Evangeline, are you okay? You've seemed a bit off lately." I forced a laugh. "I've been a little tired. Probably need a reset." "You might consider taking a short leave," Garrett suggested that evening while we sat in the den. "You've been overwhelmed. Your energy's been scattered." I didn't respond, but I noted how he phrased it, scattered, not stressed, like he was building a case against me in casual conversation. The next morning, I stepped outside to water the porch plants. It was misty, Portland's kind of damp that seeps into your bones. That's when I ran into Lily, the retired trauma nurse from 2 houses down. She waved and walked over, her thick sweater speckled with droplets. We chatted about the weather, holiday plans, the usual small talk. Then, unprompted, she leaned in and said, "You ever feel not quite like yourself? Like someone pressed pause on parts of you?" I blinked. "My aunt went through that," she continued. "Turned out her husband was slipping something in her coffee. Took her 6 months to catch on. If you ever feel foggy without a reason, trust that feeling." I smiled politely, but inside, the words carved a hollow into my chest. When she left, I went back inside and sat silently at the kitchen table, watching the steam curl from my mug. Could it be that simple? Could it be that horrifying? That night, I installed a small motion camera above the hallway door, one of those discreet battery-operated models I picked up on impulse a year ago. Just in case, I told myself then. Now it had purpose. The trash became my next obsession. Each day, I sifted through it when Garrett was out. I knew what I was looking for: packaging, residue, blister packs with missing pills. Nothing. Not yet. In my journal, I wrote, "What if I'm imagining all this? But what if I'm not?" One afternoon, as I shut my laptop, I noticed a browser tab open to my bank. I hadn't logged in all week. The page was idle, but the timestamp was recent. Garrett walked in just then, carrying 2 bags of groceries. "I was checking to see if your paycheck had cleared," he said casually. "You were asleep." I nodded slowly. "Next time, just ask." His face didn't flinch. "Didn't think you'd mind." I didn't argue. I started screenshotting everything after that. Browser history, logins, timestamps. I backed up files to a cloud I created under a different name. Each detail became part of a growing record I wasn't even sure I'd use, but needed to have. I bought a burner phone, something cheap and prepaid from the pharmacy. I took photos of pill bottles, of Garrett's laptop left open, with unfamiliar email accounts logged in. I recorded voice memos detailing every suspicion. If no one else believed me, at least I would believe myself. The house felt less like a home and more like a stage scene. Garrett's kindness, his attentiveness, it all rang too clean, too curated. Every touch, every gesture, like he was playing a role for someone just out of frame. I didn't tell anyone yet. Not even Colleen, my closest friend and confidant since college. I wanted proof. Not just feelings. I needed truth that could withstand denial. One night, I heard Garrett on the phone in the garage. The door was cracked just enough for the sound to spill in. No, not yet. She still thinks it's just work stress. Yeah, once everything clears, we can go. I stepped back from the door without a sound. My hands were steady, my heart oddly calm. Later, in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to him breathe beside me. And for the first time, I wasn't scared. I didn't know then that truth would come with a cost I hadn't dared imagine. But I was about to learn just how quickly doubt turned into danger, and how easily the people I once trusted would become strangers. It started with a receipt. I was at the bank, waiting for a printed copy of my last 3 statements. Just routine. Or so I thought. The clerk behind the glass, Melissa, I think her name was, paused for just a beat too long while handling the papers. Then, without looking up, she said, "Someone tried to confirm your PIN over the phone yesterday." Her voice was soft, like she didn't want to get caught saying it. I blinked. "Excuse me?" She kept her eyes on the monitor. It was flagged. Looked suspicious. It wasn't you, right? I didn't answer. I just smiled, took the papers, and thanked her. But I could barely keep my hand from trembling as I folded the receipt. On the drive home, I gripped the steering wheel so hard I left half moons in the leather. This wasn't just Garrett being concerned. It wasn't him being overly helpful or protective. It was premeditated. That night, I called Marla, my college roommate, someone I hadn't spoken to in a while but always trusted. I needed to hear a voice that didn't belong to someone rehearsing lines. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Evie, wow, it's been forever." I got right to it. "Marla, can I ask you something? And I need you to answer as just a friend, not someone who's heard anything else." Silence. Then, "Garrett told us you were going through something. He said you'd been paranoid, that you might say things that don't make sense." My breath caught in my throat. "I'm only asking because, are you okay? Are you safe right now?" I hung up. Not out of anger, out of grief. Garrett had already reached her. He'd spun the story so cleanly that even my truth sounded like delusion. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't lost. I was simply late to realizing the playbook he'd written behind my back. The next morning, I sat at the dining table, staring at the condensation on my glass of water. My thoughts kept rewinding to moments I had laughed off, brushed aside. Garrett bringing me vitamins each morning, double-checking my schedule for mistakes, finishing my sentences in front of friends as if I couldn't remember them. And me? I had smiled, deflected, said things like, "I guess I'm just getting old," or, "It's nice to have someone looking out for me." I saw it now for what it was. A long game, 1,000 small edits to my autonomy. I remembered a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt I'd read years ago, scribbled on a card at a bookstore. "A woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until she's in hot water." I didn't laugh at it this time. I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet. Simple at first. Dates, times, memory gaps. Then browser activity, symptoms, Garrett's behavior. I created columns for patterns, for emotional reactions. For every night he said, "You're just tired." For every morning, I woke up feeling like someone had vacuumed my clarity. The more I typed, the steadier I felt. Facts don't gaslight you. Later that week, I stopped talking as much. I nodded instead of answering. Let him speak first. Took note of his exact words. "I'm worried about you," he'd say. "You've been so forgetful." "I know," I'd reply. "It scares me too." But it didn't scare me. Not anymore. It made me furious. I made a silent promise. I wouldn't ask again. I'd confirm. The next morning, Garrett left early for a meeting. I waited 15 minutes, then pulled out the step stool from the pantry and unscrewed the vent above my desk. It had been years since I dusted it, but that made it the perfect hiding spot. I slipped a tiny pin camera inside, angled directly at my workspace. When I finished, I sat back on the floor, wiping sweat from my brow with the sleeve of my cardigan. The house was quiet again, but the air no longer felt still. It felt poised, like something was holding its breath. I wasn't sure what I'd capture, but I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want to see what he'd do when he thought I was asleep again, but I had to. The footage wasn't cinematic, no eerie music, no dramatic shadows, just the soft hum of our hallway light and the quiet click of our bedroom door closing. My breath caught as I sat on the edge of my desk chair, laptop open, watching the small square video feed on the screen. Garrett appeared in the frame, his posture relaxed, too casual for someone supposedly worried about his wife's well-being. He moved with practiced precision. In his left hand, my laptop. In his right, his phone. He opened the laptop, my laptop, like he'd done it 1,000 times. And maybe he had. The password he typed took less than 2 seconds. He navigated to a folder I didn't recognize, dragged files, took photos with his phone. He whispered something as he tapped on the keyboard. I turned the volume up. Just a whisper, but clear enough. Almost done. My body went rigid. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't made it up. I sat still for several minutes after the video ended, blinking at the screen, watching the image freeze on Garrett, closing the laptop, and walking back down the hallway. Then I reached for a USB drive and saved the entire clip. I duplicated it and slipped the second drive into the side pocket of my purse. Later, I moved that one to a hidden slot in the glove box of my car, wrapped in an old grocery receipt. Never confront a liar without leverage, I whispered to myself. I'd read that in a Malcolm Gladwell book once. At the time, it sounded clever. Tonight, it felt like gospel. The next morning was almost laughably normal. The smell of toast, the sound of the blender, Garrett humming under his breath, cheerful, as if nothing had happened. He handed me a smoothie with the same smile he'd used the night we met. Orange, ginger, and a bit of turmeric, he said. Good for stress. I smiled back, but only on the outside. Inside, I was counting every move he made, every inflection in his voice. As I sipped the smoothie, just enough to wet my lips, I noticed his eyes flicker, just briefly. He was watching my reaction, noticing if I finished the drink. I left it on the counter and mumbled something about needing to change the laundry. He said nothing, just nodded. That evening, I watched the footage again. Not because I doubted it, but because I needed to remember why I couldn't let it go. Later that night, Garrett didn't come to bed. He claimed he had reports to finish, some late-night deadlines. I didn't argue. I curled under the blanket and waited. Around 12:30, I slipped out of bed and padded to the office. I kept the hallway light off, relying on memory to avoid creaks in the floor. The office door was ajar. I stayed just outside the frame of view. He was at my laptop again. This time, I recognized the banking app he had open. He navigated with ease, transferred documents from a hidden folder into a cloud drive I didn't own. I held my phone to record, silently, even though I already had enough proof. This was no longer just about collecting evidence. It was about witnessing him become the man I didn't recognize. I waited until he left, until he shut off the light and padded back down the hall. Then I sat at my desk, heart pounding, hands trembling. I saved the new clip. I labeled it with the date. I made 3 backups. Then I stared at the black screen for what felt like an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't question it anymore. This ends now. But not with yelling. With proof. I opened a private browser tab and searched for legal consultations in the area. I found one that offered same-day calls, no ID verification required. I booked a slot under a name I hadn't used in years, my grandmother's maiden name, just in case. The confirmation email landed in my inbox 30 seconds later. I closed my laptop slowly, stood up, and walked back toward the bedroom. I knew I had 48 hours, maybe less, before he noticed what I was about to do. I didn't sleep the night I booked the consultation. My eyes stayed open long after Garrett's breathing had settled into its usual rhythm, long after the house had gone still. I stared at the ceiling and recited a silent list of everything I had seen, everything I now knew. By dawn, my decision was made. Colleen's office was exactly as I remembered it from years ago when I helped her design the financial tracking system for her practice. Modest, organized, sharp-edged. She barely blinked when I handed her the USB. She plugged it in, scrolled through the footage and the screen captures, the email threads. After 15 minutes, she leaned back and let out a low breath. "We're not just dealing with deceit," she said. "This is organized identity fraud." She clicked on one email I had flagged. It was sent from a Gmail account I didn't recognize, but the writing was unmistakably Garrett's. Colleen read it aloud. "The money will be out by Friday. She won't even know it's gone." I didn't flinch, not anymore. Colleen glanced up. "You're sitting on a landmine of legal leverage, but we have to act now." I nodded. "I'm ready." That afternoon, I changed every password. Bank accounts, insurance logins, cloud storage. I contacted our mortgage servicer to flag the house deed, initiated a lock on shared investment accounts, and moved personal items, documents, jewelry, a small cash reserve, to a secure box at a different branch under my maiden name. "I won't be the woman who waited until everything was gone," I told Colleen over the phone later. "Not this time." I remembered my Aunt Diane, how she had trusted her ex to handle things during their divorce, only to find herself locked out of accounts, her credit ruined. It had taken her years to recover. I refused to play that role. By the next morning, the lies had started feeling louder. Garrett walked into the kitchen with his usual smug ease, holding a coffee for me, and wearing that passive smile that used to comfort me. Now it only sparked revulsion. "You've been looking refreshed lately," he said, kissing my forehead. I fought the urge to spit something back and smiled instead. "Funny how clarity clears up the skin," he chuckled, oblivious. But when I checked the shared savings account from my burner phone later, the balance was lower than it should have been. Not suspiciously so, just enough to make me notice. I reported the discrepancy. Quietly, professionally. That evening, Colleen called with something new. She sounded more clipped than usual. "You might want to sit down," she said. "I pulled Garrett's name through medical databases, based on a hunch. He filed a request for a psychological evaluation under your name 3 weeks ago. The records list you as mentally erratic." I stared at the wall. "He's trying to discredit me." "He's laying the groundwork to paint you unstable," she replied. "If this escalates legally, he'll argue you're not fit to make decisions." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. Then I stood, walked into my home office, and typed a single sentence into a document titled, "If I Disappear." "Check Garrett's laptop first." I uploaded it to a private folder in my cloud storage and shared access with Colleen only. The next few days blurred into a series of quiet maneuvers. No arguments, no slips. I moved a small suitcase, nothing flashy, just enough to vanish with dignity, into the trunk of my car while Garrett took a shower. I left my favorite coat behind. That would have looked suspicious. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror, not out of vanity, just to remember the version of me who existed before she was gaslit into questioning her sanity. "I'm not running," I whispered to my reflection. "I'm reclaiming." Later, long after Garrett had fallen asleep, my phone buzzed on the windowsill. "Colleen." I answered with a whisper. "Yes?" "Evangeline. He just tried to apply for a loan in your name, using the fake eval file." Silence pulsed between us. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. Instead, I said, "Then he just crossed the line, and I'm already on the other side." And that's when I realized I wasn't just leaving. I was escaping. The next morning, the cold clarity of that truth sat with me as I sat on the edge of our bed, watching Garrett tie his tie in the hallway mirror. He didn't notice the way my eyes moved, not with suspicion, but with purpose. I knew what I had to do, and for once, I felt no hesitation. He kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're quiet today." I offered a faint smile. "Just tired." He nodded, grabbed his keys, and left. I didn't wait long. Within 20 minutes, I was at the bank, wearing sunglasses and a heavy scarf, not for disguise, but for distance. The lockbox Colleen helped me arrange was already prepared. I slid in the envelope, USBs, printed emails, photos, and the journal entries I'd written over the last month. I sealed it shut like I was sealing a chapter of my life. Maybe I was. By noon, I had called Diane, my sister's friend in Boise. I didn't go into detail, just said I needed a place for a while. "Just a little break. Work's been too much," I offered. She didn't ask many questions. "Guest room's yours." Colleen's message came through while I was driving home. "Loan apps in underwriting. It's real now. No greeting, no fluff. Just the truth." I parked in the garage, took a deep breath, and walked back inside. Garrett was on a conference call, earbuds in, nodding at his laptop. He barely noticed me walk past him to the kitchen. I smiled when he looked up. "Just grabbing water." "Doing okay?" he asked, tilting his head. "Better," I replied. "Might nap later." That night, I stayed up after he fell asleep. Quietly, methodically, I copied every contact from my phone into a new encrypted folder on my backup device. I didn't want him knowing who I might reach out to. Then I swapped out my real journal, the one with everything, in exchange for a decoy one I'd written to make me sound erratic and unsure. If he ever read it, it'd only confirm the story he'd been telling others. I slid the fake journal into the drawer, tucked behind a stack of old bills. The real one stayed locked in the glove box. The next morning, while gathering files for work, I opened my laptop and froze. It wouldn't boot. A quick inspection revealed why. The hard drive was gone, not crashed, not corrupted, removed, no panic, no screaming. Just a quiet text to Colleen. "It's happening faster than we thought." She replied 2 minutes later. "Move. Soon." By afternoon, I was sitting at a different bank, one that had no link to Garrett. The teller was young, friendly, and didn't ask many questions when I requested to open a new account under a variation of my name. I transferred just enough funds to prepare for what was coming. The rest I left untouched, for now. I walked out with my head high and my hat pulled low. On the street, everything looked the same. Coffee shops still buzzed, couples still held hands, buses still ran late. But to me, the world had tilted. I felt like a fugitive from my own life, like someone who had committed no crime but knew she was about to be hunted. That night, after Garrett went to bed, I removed my wedding ring and placed it gently on the nightstand. I looked at it, really looked at it, for the first time in years. It wasn't heavy. It was hollow. I wrote one sentence on a note card, folded it, and left it beneath the ring. This is not abandonment. This is survival. At 4:57 a.m., I slipped out the door with a single duffel bag and didn't look back. The car was already packed. The house was dark. My chest was tight, but my steps were sure. As I reversed down the driveway, something in me made me glance up toward the second floor. And there he was, Garrett, standing in the window, watching me. And he smiled. That smile would haunt me for weeks. And he smiled. That smile would haunt me for weeks. It was the kind of smile that said he knew exactly what I was doing, and worse, he didn't care. Or maybe he thought I wasn't brave enough to follow through. That look stayed with me as I drove past the city limits, my mind racing but my hands steady. The silence of that morning was broken not by my fear, but by a message I didn't expect. I had texted my sister the night before I left. Just one line. "Can we talk privately?" No details, No drama. Her reply never came. When I opened our family group chat to check for a response, it was gone. Or more accurately, I was gone, removed. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. It was our mother. "Evangeline," she said, her voice tight, rehearsed. "I got a call from Garrett. He said you're not well. He's worried. We're all worried. Do you need help?" The words didn't hit me like concern. They struck like confirmation. He had gotten to her too. "Mom," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "There's more going on here than you know." "I'm sure there is," she said quietly. "But maybe it's better to let Garrett handle things for now." That line, "let Garrett handle things." I hadn't just lost a marriage, I had lost a tribe. Over the next few days, the shift spread like mold. Quiet, invisible at first, then suddenly everywhere. Friends from our old church stopped liking my posts. Women I used to grab coffee with now gave short replies. Garrett's version of me, fragile, forgetful, maybe unstable, had moved faster than I ever could. I tried to push past it, stay focused. But that ache, that grief, sat in my chest like wet clothes after a storm. One night, I revisited old footage, more out of habit than purpose. The hallway camera, Garrett in the office again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. His laptop screen was visible, a video call. And there she was, Leora. Her voice soft, practiced. "She's isolating herself," she said. Garrett laughed. "The crazier she sounds, the faster we win." I watched my husband and his mistress strategize over my mental unraveling like it was a business pitch. My hands trembled, but I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just wrote it down. Time, date, clip number. I added it to the file. The next morning, I drove across town and opened a P.O. box under a name I hadn't used since college. I registered a Shell LLC through Colleen's firm and used it to move the car title solely to me. Piece by piece, I was peeling myself off the map we had drawn together. Then, in my dimly lit apartment, I recorded a video message. Not for Garrett. For me. The version of me who might one day wonder if she was imagining all this. "If no one believes you," I said to the camera, "believe this version of you." She saw it, she endured it, and she's not making it up. That night, the knife came from where I'd prayed it never would. Colleen called. "I need to tell you something," she said, "but it's going to hurt." "What?" "Your brother signed a character reference. For Garrett. On official court letterhead. He's claiming you've shown instability for months." The room didn't spin. My stomach didn't drop. It cracked. "You bleed for a family," I whispered, "and they still choose your abuser." She didn't respond. I stared at the ceiling, remembering Christmas dinners I had cooked alone while they all joked in the other room. Remembering every favor, every ride given, every bill quietly covered, every birthday card sent with too much cash inside. And for what? Not even silence, but betrayal. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Colleen. "They've submitted evidence of your instability to the bank." And that's when I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I became the rescue. And that's when I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I became the rescue. Colleen sat across from me in her office, the blinds drawn low to keep out the late afternoon sun. She had 2 stacks of documents between us, one labeled evidence, the other immediate action. There were folders thick with screenshots, emails, printed messages, financial statements marked in yellow ink. I could feel the weight of it all pressing into the air around us. "Is this everything?" she asked, not looking up. I nodded. "And a backup in the lockbox." Colleen slid over a crisp envelope. "You'll want to deliver this in a way he won't expect." I took it without opening it. Inside was a formal letter, simple, direct. "You know what you did. I know what you did. Let's see what the law thinks." That evening, I slipped the envelope into Garrett's work briefcase while he was in the shower. The bag lay on the kitchen chair like always, half zipped. He'd never notice. The next morning, I stayed out of sight, watched from my car as he walked out, coffee in hand, expression unreadable. He hadn't opened the envelope yet, but when he did, the clock would start ticking. By noon, Colleen submitted the forged loan paperwork to the bank's fraud unit. The document Garrett had filed with my name and falsified signature was airtight, on the surface, but I had proof of its creation. Timestamps, file metadata, even his voice in the background of one video saying, "Just sign it for now, she won't know." The bank froze all joint accounts within the hour. At his firm, Garrett tried to put on the usual charm, but cracks began to show. People noticed he was avoiding eye contact, taking more calls outside, disappearing during meetings. I didn't reach out to anyone. I didn't explain myself. I just sent a manila envelope, anonymous, containing redacted documents and internal screenshots of emails to the firm's HR department. The return address was my new P.O. box. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was strategy. Late that evening, my phone rang. My brother. "What the hell is going on, Evangeline?" I let the question hang for a moment. "You should ask Garrett, or the bank." "Mom's calling me crying. You've got the whole family tied up in knots." "I didn't tie anything," I said. "I just stopped untying their messes." Then I hung up and blocked his number. The next day, I went through every account I still had access to. I changed passwords. I switched out recovery emails. I initiated the formal process of sealing off any shared assets. Colleen helped draft a motion to request that all contact be funneled through legal channels. No more surprise texts. No more late-night knocks on doors. And then, I filed for a police wellness check at my new apartment, just a request to have patrols pass by. The officer who took my form didn't ask too many questions, but he looked me in the eye and said, "We see this more than you'd think." By the time Garrett realized what was happening, it was already too late. He showed up at the old house the following afternoon. I wasn't there, but someone else was. The process server. The man handed Garrett a thick packet and said, "You've been served." He stood in the doorway for a second too long, disbelief etched on his face. Then, slowly, he smiled. But this time, I was the one holding the evidence. And he smiled again. But this time, I was the one holding the evidence. I parked across the street from the house that used to be mine. The hydrangeas in the front yard had browned from neglect. The porch light flickered. Signs of a home rotting from the inside out. Garrett stepped onto the front step just as the server walked up the drive. The envelope was thick. Legal. Final. Garrett took it without flinching. His eyes scanned the first few lines. His jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw confusion instead of confidence. I didn't move from my car. I just watched. By the end of the day, I heard from Colleen. The bank had frozen every account with his name on it. Leora had cut ties completely, blocked him on every platform, including the burner accounts they thought I didn't know about. His firm initiated a full ethics review after HR received documentation with his signature on forged applications. One of the managing partners, who'd always shaken my hand too tightly, sent a memo suspending him from client-facing duties, pending legal clarity. He didn't know yet that I had parked nearby, that I'd been the one to deliver every breadcrumb to its destination, that he wasn't just being investigated, he was being unmasked. The next day, my voicemail filled up within hours. First messages pleading, then shouting, then that sing-song sarcasm he used when pretending he wasn't unraveling. I didn't listen to most of them. He showed up at the house again. This time, the one I had leased on my own under a different name. He stood outside the front door, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled. "You don't get to win," he muttered through the door. The hallway camera caught every word. "You were never strong enough for that." I didn't open the door. I didn't respond. I just watched the clip later with Colleen and forwarded it directly to the officer assigned to our protective detail. Then I deleted it from my phone. That same evening, my brother emailed, A wall of text, rambling and contradictory. Apologies tucked inside excuses. I didn't know. He seemed convincing. You should have just handled this privately. I closed the email without reading the second half. It was never about privacy. It was about power. And I wasn't playing his game anymore. My mother still hadn't called. Not even after everything. Not when the fraud was confirmed. Not when the documents became public record. And yet, it didn't sting like I thought it would. I hadn't lost my family. I just stopped making excuses for them. Colleen updated me mid-week. 2 subpoenas issued, police actively reviewing video evidence and records of the forged medical evaluation. Identity theft, wire fraud, maybe more, depending on what else turned up. She pushed the affidavit across the table toward me. Sign when you're ready. I didn't hesitate. My name, my real name, the one I'd almost let him erase, hit the page with steady ink. Later that night, back in my apartment, I sank into the couch. No music, no phone, no Garrett. For the first time in months, I heard nothing but the hum of my own breath. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote, "Sometimes silence isn't what happens when you lose your voice. It's what happens when you find your power." My phone buzzed once. New email, subject line, from Leora. "We need to talk." I didn't think she'd ever reach out, but the moment I saw her name, I knew another war was coming. I didn't think she'd ever reach out, but the moment I saw her name, I knew another war was coming. Leora's message was short. No pleasantries, no justification. "I didn't know it would go this far. I want to talk, off the record." I stared at it for a long time, letting her words roll through me like fog over an empty street. Colleen advised caution, but gave me the green light to proceed, so long as I recorded everything legally. I agreed to the call, not to reconcile, but to confirm what I already suspected. We spoke the next morning. Leora's voice was softer than I remembered. Tentative. "Garrett told me it was just financial restructuring," she said. "He never mentioned medication. I didn't know he had filed anything medical in your name." "You didn't ask?" She hesitated. I trusted him. I clicked the record button on my phone. She continued, "The signature, I saw it. But he said it was fine. Said it was just paperwork. He always said you were too emotional to handle finances anyway." There it was. Not just the crime, but the intent. Later that day, I met Colleen in her office. I played the recording. She didn't flinch. "This goes straight to the DA," she said. "We're escalating." We weren't just building a case anymore. We were pulling back the curtain. An anonymous email landed in Colleen's inbox that night. The sender used a name I didn't recognize, but the contents were damning. Chat logs from Garrett's office, Slack. He had bragged openly about finding a way to empty her accounts without her noticing. Another message read, "She thinks she's clever, but confusion is easy to manufacture when you're in charge of the narrative." Colleen compiled the new evidence, added it to the file. The charges expanded: conspiracy, medical fraud, identity theft. I didn't feel victory, not yet, but I felt gravity shift. Later that week, I sat in a therapist's office for the first time in years. I told her about the gaps in my memory, the way I second-guessed myself, the stretch of nights that felt more like erased chapters than sleep. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said simply, "Trauma delayed is still trauma. You survived, and that's enough." It didn't feel like enough yet, but her words planted something. That evening, I bought a painting. Abstract, messy, shades of crimson and smoke. It didn't match anything in my apartment, but it made me feel something. It was the first thing I'd bought for beauty, not function, in almost a decade. I wrote again, nightly, not evidence, not timelines, just thoughts, observations. My voice, without fear of interruption. One afternoon, I received a card in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, "We believed him. I'm so sorry." Signed only with an initial, one of Garrett's assistants, I guessed. I didn't respond, but I saved the card. My credit score had started to repair. My accounts were locked tight. I had nothing left that he could reach. Not legally, not personally. I thought I'd feel euphoric. Instead, I just felt still. Then the letter came. Court notice. Garrett's trial date had been set. I was listed as the lead witness. I sat with the paper in my lap for several minutes. Not because I doubted what I'd say, but because I knew what it would cost to say it all out loud, under oath, in front of strangers. Still, I folded the letter and slid it into my file drawer. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. But peace sometimes requires a public reckoning. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. But peace sometimes requires a public reckoning. The week before the trial moved both quickly and strangely slow, like walking through molasses with a fire at your back. Every morning started with coffee. Every evening ended with a call from Colleen. We reviewed my statement in long sessions, picking apart timelines, verifying screenshots, sharpening each word until it sliced cleanly. Colleen reminded me, "This isn't just a courtroom, it's a reckoning for everything you endured quietly." I'd wake up before sunrise some days, startled by silence. But it wasn't the fearful silence I'd grown used to. It was something else, full, honest. I cooked again. Simple things. Stew, cornbread, food that reminded me I still had a body worth nourishing. One morning, I opened my phone to a ping from a stranger's handle. It was the old Instagram account, the fake one Garrett and Leora had built to mock me. It had finally been reported. I never flagged it. But someone did. The post that brought it down was a photo of me at a family barbecue, captioned with some snide joke about instability. But now, the comments were different. "I used to think she was crazy. Now I think she's brave." She kept quiet while being erased. That's strength. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to. The day before court, I got a single text from my brother. "Good luck tomorrow." That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the letter he wrote on Garrett's behalf. Just one more attempt to keep his hands clean without lifting a finger. My mother never called. Never even sent a message. I didn't cry over it. But I did write in my journal. I didn't need their sorry. I needed my silence back. The courthouse steps were slick with drizzle the morning of the trial. I wore a navy blue suit, flats, no makeup. I wanted to walk in looking like no one else but myself, undeniably real. Inside the courtroom, Garrett sat beside his attorney, shoulders a little too stiff, eyes darting toward me once, and then never again. Leora was there too, her posture curled in on itself like a wilted fern. She wore soft pink, the color of innocence. I didn't bother to meet her gaze. When they called me to the stand, I stood calmly, walked slowly, sat upright. I spoke without shaking. I answered every question clearly. I stated facts, not feelings. I let the evidence speak where I didn't need to. My voice didn't crack, not once. I didn't look back at Garrett, not when he fidgeted in his seat, not when his attorney objected, not when the judge overruled. His silence was no longer mine to interpret. When they dismissed for deliberation, Colleen and I stepped outside. The clouds had lifted. A local reporter waited near the bottom of the stairs. "Do you feel vindicated?" she asked, microphone raised, tone overly bright. I paused. "No," I said. "I feel free." That's when Colleen stepped closer, placing her hand lightly on my shoulder. "There's something else," she said, voice lower than before. "About your father, you need to know." My heart didn't race, but my breath did pause. The story I thought ended in court had one more name left to reveal. My own. The story I thought ended in court had one more name left to reveal. My own. It started with a manila envelope on Colleen's desk. She slid it toward me, without a word, but her eyes told me it mattered. Inside was a sealed financial document, dated 12 years earlier, signed by my father before he passed. A private trust, established solely in my name. Untouched. Hidden from marital assets. A protection I never knew he had set up, and Garrett had tried desperately to make vanish. "He found the copy in the house months ago," Colleen said. He shredded it, thinking that was enough. But I had requested the original from the archive when I first took your case. It was already here. That document closed every loophole Garrett thought he could exploit. It wasn't just financial evidence, it was the final nail. A signature from the grave he couldn't forge. Weeks later, Garrett stood before the court for sentencing. His attorney tried one last pivot. Paint me as bitter, emotionally rigid. Garrett himself played the same tune, calculated charm, peppered with comments about my withdrawal from reality. I sat silent, watching him. When the bailiff cuffed his wrists, Garrett looked at me. I didn't speak to him, but in my head, I whispered, "You almost erased me, but I became the one you couldn't delete." He left the courtroom in silence. That was the last time I saw him. 3 months later, I moved to a quiet town in Oregon wine country. Rolling hills, gravel roads, the scent of lavender cutting through heat. I rented a cottage with a slanted roof and opened a small bookkeeping office. Nothing grand, just enough to offer services to women who'd been through what I had. Twice a week, I volunteered at a legal support center nearby, helping women navigate paperwork, divorce forms, budgeting. I didn't give them my story. I gave them structure, calm, answers. One of them cried once and said, "No one's ever explained it without making me feel small." The work wasn't loud, but it was mine. Then came the letter, unopened. Garrett's handwriting on the front. I slid it into the trash. I didn't need whatever version of him still thought he deserved my attention. Days later, my brother emailed. No groveling, no real apology. Just, "Hope you're doing okay." I wrote back. We all had a chance to stand up for what's right. I took mine. And that was all. The rest of the noise faded over time, bit by bit, like a radio slowly dialing away from static. My credit recovered. My mind steadied. My sense of self was no longer tethered to the validation of people who didn't care enough to protect me. I started writing. Not a blog, not notes for therapy, a memoir. The title of the first chapter came to me like a whisper from the past. The milk tasted off. In the evenings, I would sit on the back porch, wine glass untouched beside me, and write. Sometimes it was hard to relive those moments, but I didn't write for catharsis. I wrote for record, for memory, for the woman I used to be who doubted herself every time someone smiled at her while hiding a lie behind their teeth. And I wrote for the women who might still be in that stage. The final line I wrote in that first chapter wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triumphant. It was just truth. Sometimes the people who break you don't deserve to see the person you become. I stared out over the vineyard as the sun dipped below the hills. A soft knock echoed from the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a woman stood there. Her face was unfamiliar, but something in her eyes looked familiar. Tired, but awake. She held a printed copy of an article about the case, folded and worn. "You don't know me," she said, voice unsteady, "but you saved me." And with that, I smiled. Not for what I lost, but for what I refused to lose again. The last word was mine.
Hi there, I'm Mabel. My sister called me too country to show up at her best friend's millionaire wedding. What she didn't know? I'm 10 times richer than every name on that guest list. But that night wasn't about money. It was about lies, hidden invitations, a stolen startup idea, and being erased from our mother's will like I never existed. They told the world I didn't belong. So, how did I end up stealing the spotlight at their perfect event? And why did my sister turn pale when the groom called me the reason he made it? The call came just before sunset. I was in my kitchen in Austin, swirling tea leaves in a mason jar. Something I did when I needed to think. The number was familiar but unexpected. Mrs. Ivy, our old neighbor from Lexington. "I found something in my mailbox," she said. "It's addressed to you. Cream-colored envelope. Looks fancy." She read the return address and my stomach turned. Travis Burkhead's firm, not Charlene, not Carla, Travis. That invite should have reached me weeks ago. Charlene must have intercepted it. I could hear her voice now. "Why would you even want to come? It's not your scene. I thanked Mrs. Ivy, booked a flight, and packed light. I landed in Charleston the next afternoon. Outside the airport, black SUVs waited for women in glittering heels. I took the shared shuttle. I wasn't there to make an entrance. I wore a pale linen dress, my grandmother's wrap boxed carefully on my lap, and well-worn flats. The driver didn't notice me. Neither did the other passengers. Bayview Orchid Hall glowed in the heat, columns draped in orchids, music drifting out. I walked toward the entrance, invitation in hand. Before I could speak, the concierge, Marcia, looked me over and said flatly, "Staff uses the back." "I'm a guest," I replied. She frowned and called over Janice, the planner. Janice checked the tablet and gave a tight smile. "Would you mind waiting outside a moment?" she said. "Just to keep the line moving." I stepped aside. A few minutes later, Charlene arrived, heels clicking, voice sharp. "Well, well," she said. "Didn't expect you to drag that country life all the way here." Laughter. Carla wrinkled her nose at the box I held. "Is that homemade jam or something?" she snorted. One bridesmaid filmed it, another mocked my shoes. "Those souls are crying," she said. I didn't respond, just stared at Charlene. Her eyes held, but her jaw tightened. I turned and walked back outside. I wouldn't give them a scene. I sat near the fountain, the gift still on my lap. Through the open doors I heard toasts, glass clinking, more laughter. For a second I considered leaving, but I remembered why I came. Not for them, for me, for the version of me who used to stay quiet and walk away. Not tonight. The sky faded into that hazy space between peach and purple. Garden lights buzzed on, casting a soft artificial glow across the patio. I was still near the coat check window, the gift box unmoved on my lap like it carried something no one wanted. That's when I saw Tammy Ridgway, one of Carla's bridesmaids, tanned, bleached, and filtered to perfection. She stood across the courtyard, phone tilted in my direction, voice low and mocking. "Country girl returns, minus the glow-up," she whispered into the mic, fake laugh and all. Carmen and Wendy leaned in, their smirks sharp, eyes locked on the screen. "Zoom in on those shoes," Carmen said. "They're crying for mercy," Wendy added. "What's in the box, apple butter? Is that still a thing?" No one tagged me, but I felt the buzzes. I wasn't a guest. I was content, and apparently tonight's main event. I didn't move. Then Charlene appeared, wineglass in hand, face set in a version of concern that didn't fit her. She crouched beside me like I was something fragile. "Hey, Mabe," she said, soft. She only used that name when she wanted to sound nice. "I didn't know you'd come," she added. "You know how these people are. They see everything." Then lower. "I just didn't want drama. You know how you get." "How I get." She glanced at the box on my lap, fingertips brushing the twine like it might stain her. "Did you make this?" No warmth, no insult, just quiet judgment, neatly wrapped. I looked her straight in the eye. "You didn't want me here, but you didn't expect Travis to invite me himself." Her face flickered. She stood up fast, smoothed her dress. "We all move on in our own way." The music shifted, strings playing something slow and syrupy, and with it came a memory I thought I'd buried. Freshman year, I'd applied for the Stinton Fellowship, worked for weeks on the essay. When Charlene called me screaming with excitement, I thought it was good news. "They loved my essay," she said. "Can you believe it?" When she sent it for me to read, I froze. It was mine. Same images, same lines, word for word, but with her name on top. I said nothing. I thought silence was dignity. Not anymore. Back in the courtyard, I stood. Tammy had her phone up. Instagram Live. I caught her gaze just long enough to make her flinch. I didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked past the lens like it wasn't even there. That alone seemed to rattle them. Behind me, someone whispered, "Who does she think she is?" I didn't look back. But I knew the answer. You'll find out. By the time the rehearsal dinner officially began, most guests had filtered inside. Laughter spilled from the grand ballroom, refined, excessive, hollow. I stayed outside longer than I should have, letting the humid air settle around me like armor. Eventually, I walked the outer path along the hedges toward the back terrace. That's when I saw the seating chart. It was mounted on an oversized canvas, written in gold calligraphy so ornate it almost dared you to squint. I scanned the rows. Table 1, reserved for family. Table 2, Travis's colleagues. Table 3, fashion influencers. On and on it went, florid names scrolled like trophies. No Mabel. There was a single slot at table 6 labeled TBD. Not even a courtesy placeholder, just an empty chair and an afterthought. I didn't walk inside to ask. I didn't need confirmation. This exclusion had been premeditated, just like the invite, just like everything else Charlene ever orchestrated when control was in play. It reminded me of something else, another list I was erased from. Years ago. I was 26. Mom had just passed, and we were still numb when the family gathered at Charlene's brownstone in Atlanta. Everyone was drinking Pinot and pretending grief was a fashion show. At some point, Charlene pulled me aside to the kitchen, the same calm cruelty in her tone she used tonight. You know, Mabe, you shouldn't expect much. I mean, you lived your own life. You were never really part of the family plan. She didn't say, you don't belong, but she didn't have to. Weeks later, the lawyer read Mom's will. The house, the savings, even the vintage diamond brooch she used to say would be mine. Gone. All left to Charlene. I didn't fight it. I didn't protest. I packed my bag that afternoon and caught a red-eye back to Austin. I rebuilt in silence. No drama, no spectacle. Just me, and the clarity that blood ties don't guarantee decency. Now, as I stood outside the ballroom, the memory didn't sting like it used to. It just felt like a caution sign I'd finally learned to obey. I leaned against the garden rail, peering through the arched windows. Inside, Charlene was raising a flute of champagne. Carla was on stage, laughing too loudly at something someone richer had just whispered. It was all choreography, every gesture part of a brand. But I didn't feel jealous. Not anymore. I felt solid. People had stolen from me before, time, recognition, legacy, but they'd never taken my core. I let them win back then, because I thought walking away made me noble. Now I knew better. I glanced at my phone. A new alert blinked across the top, severe thunderstorm warning for the morning. A laugh escaped before I could stop it. Let it rain. As the wind picked up and cicadas buzzed beneath the glow of garden lights, I moved toward the entrance. Guests were already taking their seats inside, clinking glasses, servers floating like dancers. I stepped into the path leading up to the ballroom, gift still cradled in my arm, posture straight. I didn't feel like a threat. I didn't even feel like a guest anymore, but someone else clearly thought otherwise. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice stopped me short. Marcia, again. This time, she didn't even attempt to smile. "I'm sorry, but your name still isn't on the list. We can't let unregistered guests pass this point." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the envelope. It was the same one Travis's office had mailed. Cream with gold foil, sealed twice. "This was sent directly from the groom's company," I said calmly. "She didn't touch it. I understand, but we were given very clear directives." As if on cue, Janice appeared from the side hall, tablet in hand, and attitude sharpened like a blade. "Mabel Hembry?" she asked, barely looking up. I nodded once. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said in that saccharine firm planner voice. "We received a private request earlier this week, asking that your place at dinner be withdrawn. The seating chart was finalized last night. We weren't told to expect you." I looked directly at her. Let me guess. Private, meaning not from Travis. She didn't answer. Charlene had been busy. "You're drawing attention," Janice added, glancing behind me at the couple pausing to watch. I met her stare without blinking. "Not as much as you think." She didn't respond. Just tilted her head at the two security guards who had quietly flanked the corridor. They weren't aggressive, just there. A wall with matching ties. "May we escort you back to the outer gate?" one asked. I looked past them into the ballroom. The chandeliers sparkled like someone had thrown 1,000 diamonds into the air and frozen them mid-fall. Charlene was laughing beside Carla, her hand on the bride's arm like she owned the place. I could have shouted something then, called her out, shattered the illusion. But that would have given her exactly what she wanted, a scene. Instead, I nodded at the guards. "Lead the way." As we walked, I heard the murmurs grow louder. Who is she? Was that her sister? Is she crashing? The phones came out again, subtle and shameless. But I kept walking, one foot then the next, chin high, shoulders even, no tears, no tremble. Outside, the air was thicker than earlier. Storm on the horizon, maybe. I stopped just before the outer gate, turned slightly toward Janice, who was watching from the portico. "You should bill the bride for this," I called. "The cost of what you just allowed won't show up on your balance sheet tonight. But tomorrow? That'll be a different story." I stepped to the welcome table and gently placed the box down. Still wrapped. Still beautiful. Still mine. The twine bow hadn't moved. I turned from the welcome table and started walking toward the front gates. The estate lights cast long shadows across the gravel, and the air carried that pre-storm buzz, like everything around me was holding its breath. My heels scraped lightly on the stone as I reached into my purse to call a ride. "Mabel!" The voice hit harder than I expected. I paused. Travis Burkhead was jogging across the lawn in a tailored tuxedo, tie askew, hair slightly damp with sweat. His face looked like he hadn't blinked in minutes. "I didn't know you were here," he said breathlessly, slowing to a stop. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I held his gaze for a moment. "Maybe ask the bride and my sister." He ran a hand down his jaw, visibly shaken. "You weren't on the list. They said you declined." "I never got the invitation. It was sent to my childhood home. Intentionally." His eyes widened. "I swear, Mabel, I had no idea." I let the silence settle. Then he said it. What should have been said years ago. "You gave me everything when I had nothing." He looked down, almost ashamed. 7 years ago, when nobody would touch me, you sent me a $15,000 check. I didn't even ask. You just believed." "You didn't owe me anything," I said, my voice steady. "I owe you everything," he corrected, louder now. "There's no cloud crown, no IPO, no wedding, nothing, without that start." His voice cracked slightly as the ballroom doors opened behind us. Light and music spilled out. People turned. Some already had their phones up, filming. Travis didn't lower his voice. "She's the reason I'm standing here," he said, gesturing toward me. "Not the investors, not Carla, her." Someone near the door gasped. Carla stood frozen in the doorway, one hand still on a glass of wine, her expression sliding into panic. I didn't move. But inside, something shifted. Charlene appeared next. She stormed down the steps toward us, face flushed with something between fury and fear. "Travis, this isn't the time," she hissed, grabbing his elbow. "People are watching. You're embarrassing Carla." "You want to talk about embarrassment?" I said quietly, turning toward her for the first time that night. "Try being erased from your own bloodline." Charlene's hand flinched off Travis. "You're making a scene," she snapped. "Then let the scene begin," I replied. "You started it." Travis didn't move. He just stood beside me, eyes forward, no apology in sight. After a few tense seconds of Charlene frozen in place, Travis leaned over and said quietly, "Come with me, just out back. I think you need a breather." We cut through the hedged path around the ballroom and slipped onto the side terrace. Soft jazz floated from overhead speakers. A few guests were out here nursing drinks or sneaking cigarettes, too polite to stare. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. But then, another voice cut in. "Mabel?" I turned, stunned. There she was, Olivia Ray. We hadn't spoken in nearly 5 years, not since the final time she visited my old place in Austin. She was now with Vero Capital, a name I'd seen tagged in Carla's LinkedIn brag posts. "What are you doing here?" she asked, eyes wide. "Wait, are you her Mabel?" I nodded slowly, uncertain. She stepped closer, lowered her voice. "I had no idea you were connected to all this. I thought you were off the grid." My spine straightened. "Not off the grid, just quiet." Then Olivia's voice dropped even lower. "You know that pitch Carla's been flaunting? This whole Revive brand she built a few years ago?" My silence said enough. "It's yours," she said. "Or at least it was. Remember that campus hackathon, 2016? You showed us that blueprint over tacos." My pulse kicked. I remembered. The layered wellness app model. My model. I'd shared it casually during a study break, never thinking it'd leave the table. "She pitched it 2 years later as her own," Olivia added. "Filed the trademark. I pushed back, But they made me sign an NDA when they hired me. It's been eating me alive ever since. I blinked, absorbing it in waves. Travis had drifted to the terrace edge, giving us space. He didn't need to hear to understand. I felt it in my chest. Clicks locking into place. Quiet thefts. Branded lies. But this time, I had a witness. No more letting things slide just because they sparkle, I murmured. Inside, I could hear Carla's voice over a mic. Her toast had started. The grand finale. I looked at Olivia. Can you walk with me? She nodded without question. We stepped into the ballroom just as Carla raised her glass. I walked calmly to the front, heels quiet on velvet. She saw me. Her smile faltered. I didn't grab the mic. Didn't need to. I handed her an envelope. Sealed. Simple. You'll want your lawyer to read that before Monday, I said, then turned toward the crowd. They didn't understand yet, but they would. Carla clutched the envelope like it burned. Her smile was gone, and in its place sat something I'd never seen on her face before. Uncertainty. The ballroom hushed. The clinking stopped. Even the waitstaff paused mid-step. All that remained was the sound of the air conditioning and the weight of eyes. One of the journalists from the media table, a guy in horn-rimmed glasses and a blazer far too casual for this crowd, stood. Is it true? He asked, voice cutting clean through the tension. Did Revive steal a wellness patent? Gasps followed like dominoes. Carla opened her mouth, then closed it again. Travis didn't wait. He stepped forward, his voice louder than I'd ever heard it. Mabel is the reason this company, this entire night, exists. I didn't build it alone. None of us did. And some of you, he scanned the crowd, owe her far more than silence. I didn't flinch. I looked straight at Charlene, whose wineglass was now trembling just slightly in her hand. You judged what I wore, I said, calm and clear, what I brought, where I sat, but never once did any of you ask who I was. That's when the screen behind the stage blinked, flickered, then lit up. Photos rolled across it. A school library ribbon cutting, a rural clinic opening, a headline from Forbes, the anonymous investor behind 3 rising Fortune 100 techs. A quiet wave of awe moved through the room. Ruben must have triggered it remotely. It was the truth, just without glitter. I wasn't trying to steal their spotlight. I was correcting the credits. But even as they watched, my mind drifted back, not to a boardroom but a cafeteria in Kentucky. I was 16. I'd won the state science fair, first place. For once I'd felt worthy. But backstage, my mother had pulled me aside. Let Charlene accept the award, she'd said softly. She needs this more than you. You'll be fine. That was the first time I learned to disappear for someone else's comfort. Now, I was done fading. As murmurs spread, Carla stepped back, bumping the mic. Charlene moved forward, ever the fixer. This is getting out of hand, she muttered, shaking her head. Mabel, this isn't about you. I turned steady and unblinking. That's the only thing you've ever said that's true, I replied. Guests shifted, a few left. One woman whispered, she's the real one. I didn't chase applause. I never had. But I wasn't walking out this time. Tomorrow, no one will know their brand. But they'll know my name. Carla tried to recover. She laughed, a high, glassy sound that fell flat against the silence. I think we've all had enough drama for one night, she said, voice tight. From the back of the room, someone started clapping. Slowly. Then came another, and another. But it wasn't for Carla. The applause wasn't celebration. It was mockery. A few people chuckled. Then the sound swelled into laughter, not joyful, but brutal. Carla's smile cracked. I could see the muscles twitch in her cheek as her public image buckled. One man near the doors muttered, That's what happens when your empire's built on Instagram filters and borrowed brilliance. Phones lit up again. Sponsors left mid-meal. A champagne flute hit the floor near table 9 and shattered, but no one turned to look. They were all watching her crumble. Charlene, always the cleaner, surged forward and grabbed the mic. Let's remember what this is, she said quickly. A celebration of love. This night wasn't meant to... I stepped closer. You don't get to tell this story anymore, I said. Not here. Not now. She froze. You call this love? I asked, sweeping a glance over the scattered crowd. Then maybe you've never really seen it. Silence returned. this time carved out of discomfort. Janice, the planner, walked up to the platform. Her voice was steady, like someone used to extinguishing fires, but this one she didn't try to save. "I've organized over 200 weddings," she said. "This isn't love. This is ego, performance, spin." She turned to Carla. "As of this moment, we're terminating our service contract. Your brand is no longer in alignment with our values." There were actual gasps now. Carla's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but no words came. Charlene snapped at Janice. "You can't just walk out mid-event." But Janice wasn't listening. She handed her headset to an assistant and walked straight out the doors. Carla stepped down, heels shaking, face ashen. Charlene followed in her wake, whispering something angry that got drowned by murmurs. Then Ruben's name appeared on the projection screen. A pre-written message blinked in clean Helvetica across the display. "Mabel Hembry is co-founder, lead investor, and the logistical partner responsible for tonight's venue. Any inquiries may be directed to her office." That was it. Just facts. Truth didn't need drama to land. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just stood still as the world reset around me. They didn't invite me, but I showed up. And now, I'm staying. The ballroom lights dimmed behind me as I stepped into the humid night. A breeze rolled off the water, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. The valet line was shorter now. Most of the guests had already fled, some red-faced, some recording, all pretending they hadn't seen what they saw. Travis caught up to me just before I reached the curb. His tie hung loose, jacket unbuttoned, hair mussed like he'd run a marathon in his own life. "I wish it had been you beside me tonight," he said, voice low. I looked at him, not with anger, but with finality. "It still can be. Just not here. Not like this." He nodded, then stepped back into the glow of the porch lights without another word. The driver opened the car door, but I turned to glance back once, not at the people, not at the building, but at what I'd reclaimed. At Charleston Airport, the news screens were already cycling headlines. "Influencer's wedding implodes amid lawsuit and fraud allegations." "PR exec Charlene Garlow removed from ethics committee following scandal." "The woman behind the curtain, Mabel Hembry and the quiet rise." I didn't need to read them. I knew. No one called me. Not Charlene, not Carla. But I didn't expect them to. That kind of silence? It was familiar now. Somewhere over Louisiana, I listened to a voicemail from Ruben. "You stood tall, May," he said. "Quiet power shifts the loudest rooms. Come home." When I arrived in Austin, the sun was barely rising. The city still slept. I dropped my bag inside the doorway and walked straight to the quilt box. The one I'd carried across states for a moment that never came. Carefully, I peeled back the wrap. Inside was a story, stitched from pieces of shirts I'd worn during my first fundraise, a strip from Mom's apron, a faded patch sewn with my company's first logo. In the center, tucked tight, was a piece of an old field jacket Dad wore the year he passed. I draped it across the armchair by the window. It belonged there. I didn't seek revenge. This was reclamation. Even after all that happened, I didn't walk away seeking revenge. What I wanted was clarity, to reclaim what was mine, and to show anyone out there who's been told they weren't enough. You are. You don't have to wear labels or shout to prove your worth. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the loudest truth. Family doesn't always mean fairness, and blood doesn't always equal loyalty. But healing? That's personal. And it begins the moment you stop asking for permission to exist fully. So, if you've ever been laughed at, dismissed, or pushed to the side, I hope you remember this. You don't need an invitation to take up space. Sometimes the most powerful move is showing up, unapologetically. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone close to you? Did you ever prove them wrong? Or are you still waiting for your moment? Let me know in the comments. If this story hit home for you, drop a 1 in the chat or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if you didn't like this video, that's okay too. Just let me know why and where you watched it from. We grow through honest stories and real talk. Want more stories that speak truth and healing? Hit that subscribe button and be part of the journey. Because I promise you, the next story might just be yours. Hi there, I'm Bella. My sister mocked my so-called failed career right in front of 100 guests. At her own wedding. Everyone laughed. Even my parents didn't flinch. But then, her boss stood up and introduced me as the major shareholder of his firm. Sounds unbelievable? That wasn't even the worst part. You see, this family didn't just overlook me. They used me, lied to me, tried to erase me. Why would a mother ask her daughter to take the fall for a crime she didn't commit? Why would a father sabotage her first real chance at a future? And why, after all of that, did I still show up? I arrived late on purpose. The Wisteria Grand Ballroom buzzed with champagne flutes and fake smiles, the kind of place my sister Kendra had always dreamed of. Crystal chandeliers, custom floral arches, monogrammed cocktail napkins. Every detail screamed status. I walked in alone, in a simple navy dress, no designer label, no +1, and no intention of staying long. I hadn't seen most of these people in years. Turns out absence doesn't make anyone's heart grow fonder. As I stood near the back pretending to enjoy the string quartet's cover of a Taylor Swift ballad, I caught the familiar clang of silverware tapping a glass. Kendra stood, sparkling in lace and diamonds, her arm looped through Damien's. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," she began sweetly. "Especially family." Then she turned her eyes directly toward me. "Even those of us who've taken less traditional career paths." A few polite chuckles followed. Damien smirked like he was in on the joke. Kendra continued, "Not everyone is meant for corporate life. Some people chase dreams, others consult." More laughter now. My aunt tried to hide her grin behind a napkin. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I'd learned over the years that dignity doesn't require defense. She raised her glass. "To following your passion, no matter how small." My fingers tightened around my flute stem. Not because I was hurt. I'd been prepared for something like this. But I hadn't expected it to sting the same way it always had. Not after everything I'd built. Why did I even show up? Because deep down, some part of me still wanted to be seen. Not as the disappointment. Not as the footnote. Just seen. I stood by the far column, letting the moment pass. If there's one thing growing up in this family taught me, it's how to smile through humiliation. I took a sip and scanned the room, mentally counting the seconds until I could leave without raising eyebrows. Then, I saw him, Elliot Kerman. He wasn't supposed to be here, not at this hour, not yet. But maybe this was exactly when it needed to happen. I turned away from the ballroom before anyone else could catch my face. The last thing I needed was another pitying glance or someone pretending they didn't hear what they clearly did. I stepped through the tall glass doors onto the terrace. The evening air was cool, calming in contrast to the heat swirling inside me. Behind me, the door clicked softly. I didn't need to look. I already knew who it was. "You always did like the quiet corners," my mother's voice murmured. She approached slowly, her heels careful against the stone floor like she didn't want to startle me. I stayed silent. Let her talk. Marlene stood beside me, eyes fixed on the view. Charlotte's skyline glimmered in the distance, untouchable, perfect, like everything she wished our family looked like. "You know Kendra's worked really hard for this. Damien's connections could open more doors at La Vista," she began, as if reading from a carefully rehearsed script. Still, I said nothing. "She's building something, and your name's been floating around a lot lately. This merger of yours, it's making people nervous." My mouth stayed still, but I felt my jaw lock. "Bella," she said, gentler this time, "if you care about your sister, maybe now's not the time to shake things up." There it was, the line that said everything. I turned to face her. "So now I'm the problem." "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant." Her face hardened just slightly. "I'm asking for discretion. Just stay in the background, for Kendra." "You all liked me better when I was invisible," I said quietly. "But I'm not fading into the wallpaper so Kendra can play princess." "I'm not asking you to give anything up," she insisted. "Just delay it. Let her have her moment." She already had it, on stage, in front of everyone, at my expense. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, edged like broken glass. I stepped past her, back toward the ballroom doors. Just before I pulled them open, I added, "You always said family comes first, but what you meant was, Kendra comes first and I should disappear." I re-entered the room with a calm she didn't deserve to witness. Across the floor, Kendra tossed her head back, laughing like her crown couldn't crack. Damien leaned into her shoulder, smiling the way men do when they think the room belongs to them. It used to hurt, but not tonight. If peace meant erasing myself, then maybe this family never wanted peace. Just silence. I stepped back outside, closing the glass door behind me, this time not to escape, just to breathe. The air had cooled since earlier, carrying the faint scent of lilacs from the courtyard. I leaned on the terrace railing, trying to collect my thoughts, but instead, something collected me. A memory, sharp, heavy, uninvited. It had been over a decade, but I still remembered the beige carpet of that office, the smell of cheap, pine-scented air freshener, and how tight my blazer felt across my shoulders. I was 22. I had prepped for that interview like my future depended on it, because it did. I wanted that job at Arkway Financial more than anything, not because of prestige or pay, but because it was mine to earn. I'd arrived 20 minutes early, resume printed on ivory paper, hair pulled into the neatest twist I could manage. But the receptionist looked up at me strangely, hesitated, then said, "Someone from your family stopped by earlier. Your father, I believe. He left a message with Mr. Grant." Confused, I nodded. She motioned for me to wait. Then I saw him. My father, Ronald, standing across the lobby like he had every right to be there. He wasn't smiling. He was calm, cool, like he was handling a chore. When Mr. Grant, the hiring manager, stepped out, I opened my mouth to greet him. But my father beat me to it. "She's not ready," he said, voice low but firm. "Her anxiety's worse than she lets on. She gets overwhelmed, shuts down. We're trying to guide her towards something better suited." I froze. My heart raced, but my legs wouldn't move. Mr. Grant looked at me, then back at him. "I see. Well, perhaps we'll reschedule once things are more stable." The meeting ended before it began. That night, at dinner, my father simply said, "I saved you from embarrassment. You'll see it was for your own good." But I didn't see it. Not then. Not now. What I saw was a man who decided for me that I was unfit to choose my own path. Back on the terrace tonight, I clenched the edge of the stone railing, grounding myself. "You didn't protect me," I whispered to no one. "You erased me." I'd spent years convincing myself that staying quiet kept the peace, but no one had ever asked what peace cost me. Back inside, the lights seemed harsher now. My father stood by the bar, laughing with Damien like nothing had ever happened, because for him, nothing had. He noticed me watching. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. They thought I'd vanished years ago, but I hadn't disappeared. I'd just been growing where no one thought to look. I crossed the ballroom slowly, weaving past servers with polished trays and guests lost in small talk. My hand found an untouched flute of champagne on the bar. Refill by convenience, not celebration. As I turned to lean against the marble edge, I felt the air shift behind me. Marlene. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to speak with you," she said low, her tone clipped. "Privately." I didn't move. She stepped closer. "Do you remember what you did for Kendra? With the La Vista board?" The words hit before I could stop them. Years ago. Kendra had fudged quarterly numbers, replaced stagnant engagement data with glossy, inflated metrics. A junior staffer flagged it. An internal review was opened. I had no stake in it, except that months earlier, I'd done part-time freelance analytics for that same campaign. That's when Mom cornered me outside her kitchen. "You'll say it was your file," she'd told me. "It was just a spreadsheet mix-up. Nobody needs this scandal." I shook my head then, stunned. She lied to her own company. Why should I cover it? "Don't be dramatic," she'd hissed. "Do you want your sister's career destroyed over a software error? That's how they always did it. Wrapped deception in concern, masked control as protection. And I did it. I swallowed the truth for the sake of family." It wasn't bravery. It wasn't kindness. It was fear disguised as loyalty. Now, standing across from her again, I saw she wasn't asking me to remember that night. She was using it as leverage. That's what family does. she said evenly. No, I replied, my voice steady. That's what manipulation does. You asked me to lie, not to protect her, but to preserve your version of perfect. She blinked. That soft gasp people give when control slips. I'm not your fixer anymore, I added, and I'm done pretending silence is grace. I walked away, feeling her eyes on my back, but I didn't turn. From across the room, Kendra saw us, her brows creased, her mouth twitching like she might come over, but she didn't. Of course she didn't. They've always been better at turning away than facing what they've done. But I'd learned to face it, all of it, and this time, I wouldn't be the one cleaning it up. I made my way toward the dessert table, not for the sweets, just distance. The murmurs of the ballroom dulled behind me as I passed clusters of half-drunk smiles. Before I could reach for anything, I heard his voice. Didn't expect to see you here tonight, Bella. Damien, his tone casual but calculated. He picked up a chocolate tart, not even looking at me at first. I heard Elliot might show up too. Small world, huh? I turned slightly, just enough to catch his smirk. He always acted like charm was armor, as if I hadn't seen beneath it. I suppose some people show up when you least expect, I said evenly. He chuckled. You know, there's still time to reconsider that opportunity I mentioned. Quietly. Just between us. I didn't blink. 2 months ago, he messaged me under a fake name on LinkedIn, claimed to be launching a disruptive tech concept and wanted me as a founding advisor. What he really meant was, help him steal La Vista's client list and pivot it into a side company, behind Kendra's back no less. When I declined, he doubled down, hinting at insider access and mutual benefit. I saved the screenshots. I never responded. Now here he was, pretending it never happened. Funny how memory works, I said, grabbing a fork off the linen, especially when people think no one's keeping score. His jaw twitched. I leaned in just enough. Would you like me to forward those messages to Kendra? Or maybe Elliot would enjoy them more? Damien's grin flattened. Look, he muttered, this doesn't have to be messy. No, I said calmly, placing my glass on a passing tray. But if you keep playing dumb, it will be. He glanced toward Kendra. She won't believe you. Then she chose poorly. Again. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene, but he heard me. As I walked away, I passed Elliot near the edge of the dance floor. He met my eyes and gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, let's see how loud the truth can get. Just as I drifted toward the edge of the crowd, the room stilled. A soft clink echoed from the stage, followed by Elliot's voice, measured, confident, unmistakably intentional. If I could have just a moment, he said, raising his glass slightly. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but I'm glad I came after all. It's not often I get to celebrate alongside one of Aurora Capital's most instrumental partners, Bella Macklin. Silence. Heads turned like dominoes. I heard a fork clatter to the floor. Kendra's expression froze halfway through a smile. Damien tensed, eyes darting toward me. Elliot didn't waver. Most of you know her as Kendra's little sister. What you don't know is, without her strategic foresight, this room, this company, and frankly, some of your paychecks wouldn't exist. Bella doesn't just consult, she steers. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mother's jaw slackened. My father furrowed his brow as if trying to calculate damage control on the fly. And I? I lifted my glass with calm precision. Thank you, Elliot, I said clearly. I wasn't planning to say anything tonight either, but maybe it's time. As I looked out, faces I hadn't seen in years stared back, half stunned, half scrambling to realign their assumptions. But I wasn't looking for approval. I was reclaiming space. And as I stood there, a memory slipped in like a shadow. I was 26, seated at our dining table with a pitch deck in hand. Aurora Capital had been an idea then. Research-heavy, lean, scalable. I showed them everything. Dad skimmed page 1 before chuckling. You want to play Wall Street? Be serious. Mom didn't even open the folder. Kendra's MBA was expensive. We can't stretch ourselves for another experiment. That was the day I learned funding would come from somewhere else. Or nowhere. Either way, I'd make it work. And I did. Back in the present, I met Kendra's eyes. Her lips parted, searching for something to say, but all she managed was a whisper to Damien. "What the hell is going on?" I smiled. "Let's finish this." The silence after my smile didn't last. I barely took a step before Kendra cut through the crowd, heels clicking like a countdown. Damien trailed close behind, his expression souring by the second. "You think this is cute?" she hissed, inches from my face. "That stunt? That announcement? You're lucky we don't sue." Damien chimed in, voice low but sharp. "We've already spoken to our attorneys. What you did tonight, defamation, public slander." I kept my posture still, steady. "Which part? Elliot's words about my ownership? Or your wedding toast, where you mocked my entire life?" Their silence answered for them. I let a breath hang, then pulled my phone from my clutch. "Funny thing about public threats," I said. "They invite transparency, which means discovery." I tapped a folder labeled 2014 Strategy Original Drafts. The screen displayed a clean file, one Kendra had seen before, because I'd shown it to her myself. Her eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "You remember mid-market targeting for beauty lines, right?" I said. "I shared this with you, back when I still believed sisters build each other up." Her mouth opened, then closed. Damien looked at her, genuinely confused. "Oh, she didn't tell you?" I turned to him. "The entire pitch that got her that La Vista promotion? It was mine, word for word. Dates and metadata prove it." I hadn't said a word back then. I was younger, hopeful, naive enough to think being quiet was noble, but tonight wasn't about noble. "I built myself in silence," I said evenly, sliding the phone back into my bag. "And you assumed silence meant weakness." Damien's shoulders stiffened. Kendra's hands trembled. They didn't shout. They didn't deny it. Because they couldn't. From the corner of my eye, I saw Elliot move, not toward me, but away from them. Quiet. Purposeful. Like someone marking the beginning of an end. I stepped back, letting them absorb the shift. "Go ahead," I said. "Call your lawyers." I turned before either of them could find words. Now it was time to clean house. The hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound in the corridor as I stepped into Argentedge's headquarters that Monday morning. This wasn't just another day, and I wasn't just another woman in a blazer. I was here to finish what should have ended long ago. Emma greeted me near the elevator. "The La Vista board is already seated." I gave her a nod. "Let's not keep them waiting." Inside the conference room, glass walls surrounded a long, polished table where Elliot stood at the head, flanked by the other board members. He didn't smile, just gave a slight tilt of the head, enough to signal, "It's yours now." I walked to the front, plugged in my drive, and the projector flared to life behind me. "I'll keep this brief," I began. "Today's review is not about image, it's about performance, the kind that affects shareholders, clients, and every person who works under this roof." Slide after slide, Kendra's numbers told their own story. Inflated quarterly projections, budget overruns, anonymous HR complaints compiled and corroborated. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't editorialize. I simply concluded, "We value contribution, not proximity." There was a pause, the kind that holds breath in a room. Then, one by one, hands went up for the vote. Kendra was removed, effective immediately. Damien, seated 2 chairs from her, didn't wait to be dismissed. He stood, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. I gathered my notes calmly. The power wasn't in the theatrics, it was in the quiet. As I moved to leave, a memory stirred. The first time Elliot ever backed me, not just with words, but with action. 3 years ago. I was drowning in red. One deal fell apart, and it triggered a cascade. My name was still unknown. Banks avoided me. But Elliot? He'd taken one look at my pitch and said, "You don't need a lifeboat. You need someone who sees the storm the way you do." That funding kept me alive, but his belief? That lit the fire. Now I walked past Kendra, who sat frozen, not crying, not yelling, just stunned. Her world hadn't ended, but the center had shifted, and it no longer belonged to her. I didn't gloat. I didn't slow down. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. And justice, when done right, doesn't need applause. It was a Tuesday evening when the envelope arrived. No return address. Just my name, Bella. written in that looping, deliberate script I hadn't seen in years. I let it sit untouched on the kitchen counter while I reheated dinner. I didn't rush. I knew who it was from the second I saw the handwriting, and I knew it wasn't asking for anything, at least not out loud. When I finally opened it, the paper was heavy, unlined. She'd written in blue ink. My mother never used blue ink unless it was real. She wrote, "I didn't see you clearly, Bella. I thought protection meant softening the world for you. I realize now I was the one distorting it. I followed noise, the kind Kendra made so well, but I ignored your silence. I didn't know how to raise a daughter who didn't need saving. Just space. You don't need to reply. I just needed you to know. There were no excuses, no grand declarations of change, just a quiet reckoning." I folded the letter and slipped it into the drawer beside a photo of us, the last full family portrait before I started Aurora. We were smiling back then, but I remember now how forced it felt, how small I made myself to keep peace. I didn't cry. I didn't text her. Not because I was angry, but because healing doesn't always look like phone calls and reunions. Some wounds close in silence. That night, I sat by the window and let the city speak. In the distance, lights blinked steady and patient, like they'd always been there, waiting for me to catch up. The next morning, I walked into Argentedge in a navy suit. Nothing flashy, just firm. Emma looked up from her desk. "Investor call in 10 minutes. Want coffee?" "Black, strong," I said. I stepped into my office, placed my phone down, and walked to the glass wall. The skyline stretched wide before me, crisp, unshaken. They finally saw me, but I had already built the view. Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's survival. And for years, I survived by staying small enough to fit inside the version of me my family could tolerate. But growth has a way of cracking walls wide open. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by the people who were supposed to believe in you, let me be the voice reminding you. Their vision isn't your limit. You don't need to yell to prove your worth. You just need to build, quietly, deliberately, until what you've built speaks louder than their opinions ever did. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about boundaries, about choosing truth over tradition, and self-respect over silent loyalty. And maybe you're in that place now, where your voice is shaking, your path uncertain, your roots deep but unseen. If you are, keep going. What feels like isolation might just be transformation. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved? Just to finally love yourself, right? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment, even just a 1 inch, if this hit home. Or let me know where you're watching from. If you didn't like this video, that's okay too. Tell me why. I read every comment, and this space is for real stories, not perfect ones. And if you want more stories like this, true and human, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep growing together.